Emily Harper had imagined her wedding day since she was a teenager, filling journals with sketches of white flowers, handwritten vows, and photographs clipped from magazines. Every dream led to this crisp autumn morning, when golden sunlight stretched across the rolling countryside and painted the historic estate in warm, inviting colors. Guests stepped onto winding stone paths lined with blooming roses, smiling as soft music floated through the cool air. Everything looked exactly as Emily had once imagined, perhaps even more beautiful. Standing at the center of it all, she believed this was the beginning of the happiest chapter of her life. Friends and relatives admired the carefully decorated venue, where elegant white chairs faced a flower-covered arch overlooking gentle hills. Laughter mixed with the sound of birds, and servers carried sparkling drinks between tables dressed with fresh greenery and candles. Every detail reflected months of careful planning. Emily wanted everyone she loved gathered in one place, celebrating hope instead of hardship. For one perfect afternoon, it seemed the world had agreed to grant her wish. Inside the bridal suite, Emily adjusted the delicate lace sleeves of her gown while taking a slow breath before the ceremony. Her reflection showed bright eyes filled with excitement rather than fear. She smiled at herself, whispering that everything was finally falling into place. The nervous anticipation felt natural, almost comforting. She believed every couple experienced these butterflies before exchanging lifelong promises. Her mother, Victoria Harper, entered quietly carrying a small velvet box containing a family bracelet that had belonged to Emily's grandmother. Victoria's smile was warm, yet something about it seemed fragile. Her eyes glistened with tears that appeared deeper than ordinary wedding emotions. She fastened the bracelet around Emily's wrist with trembling fingers. "You look beautiful," Victoria whispered. Emily embraced her tightly. "Thank you for everything, Mom. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Victoria held the hug a second longer than expected before gently stepping away. "I just want today to be perfect." "It already is," Emily replied with complete confidence. Victoria forced another smile, though her expression briefly drifted toward the window, as if searching for courage somewhere beyond the gardens. Outside, Daniel Brooks greeted arriving guests with polite conversation and practiced smiles. Tall, well-dressed, and admired by nearly everyone present, he appeared to be every bride's ideal groom. Yet beneath his calm appearance, an invisible storm churned. He repeatedly checked his watch, rubbed his palms together, and scanned the crowd more often than necessary. Each time someone called his name, he answered warmly, masking his growing unease. His longtime friend Mark noticed immediately. "You all right?" Mark asked quietly. Daniel laughed without conviction. "Just wedding nerves. You've handled tougher days than this." "I know." Mark studied him for another moment before nodding. "Once the ceremony starts, you'll relax." "I hope so," Daniel answered, though his voice lacked certainty. Soon the music began, signaling every guest to take their seats. Conversations softened into expectant silence as Emily appeared at the end of the aisle with Victoria beside her. The sight drew smiles, quiet applause, and more than a few tears. Daniel looked toward Emily, and for a fleeting instant his anxiety disappeared. She smiled back, believing she saw nothing except love reflected in his eyes. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. Vows were exchanged with heartfelt sincerity. Rings slipped onto waiting fingers, and joyful applause echoed across the countryside as the newlyweds shared their first kiss. Cameras flashed while friends embraced one another, convinced they had witnessed a perfect union. As afternoon faded into evening, the celebration moved inside the grand reception hall. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished wooden floors, while champagne glasses clinked in cheerful toasts. Music filled the room, laughter grew louder, and every photograph captured smiling faces. Yet beneath the elegant celebration, unnoticed glances passed between two people who carefully avoided lingering near one another. Victoria occasionally disappeared into the crowd without explanation. Daniel's smile returned each time she reappeared, only to fade moments later. Emily remained blissfully unaware, believing the happiest day of her life had only just begun, never realizing that before the night ended, One unexpected discovery would shatter everything she thought she knew. As twilight settled over the countryside estate, the wedding reception blossomed into the joyful celebration everyone had anticipated. Strings of warm lights glowed across the gardens, laughter echoed beneath the open pavilion, and the dance floor remained crowded with smiling guests. The earlier tension that had briefly crossed Daniel's face seemed to have disappeared behind polite conversation and carefully rehearsed happiness. Emily watched friends and relatives enjoying themselves, grateful that months of planning had created an evening that felt almost magical. The newlyweds moved from table to table, accepting congratulations, posing for photographs, and sharing short conversations with guests who had traveled from across the country. Every handshake and embrace reminded Emily how fortunate she was. People complimented the venue, the decorations, and the heartfelt ceremony. More than once, someone joked that it was the perfect wedding. Emily laughed each time. "I hope everyone remembers it that way," she replied. "They definitely will," one elderly aunt assured her. "This is a night no one will ever forget." Emily smiled warmly, unaware of how painfully true those words would become. The band shifted into a slower melody, while waiters served dinner beneath sparkling chandeliers inside the reception hall. Glasses clinked together as friends offered cheerful toasts to the newly married couple. Daniel appeared relaxed again, thanking everyone with sincere appreciation. Beside him, Emily noticed her mother applauding with genuine pride, though Victoria's smile still carried a sadness that seemed strangely out of place. During dinner, Emily glanced toward her mother's seat several times. At first, Victoria chatted comfortably with nearby relatives. Then, without drawing attention to herself, she quietly stood and slipped through one of the side doors leading toward the private corridors of the estate. Emily assumed she needed a moment alone. Several minutes later, Victoria returned, smiling politely as though nothing unusual had happened. The evening continued with dancing and laughter. Emily became occupied greeting another group of guests who wanted photographs. By the time she looked back toward her mother's table, Victoria had vanished again. "Has anyone seen Mom?" Emily asked her cousin Olivia. "I think she went outside," Olivia answered casually. "Maybe she needed some fresh air." Emily nodded without concern. Soon afterward, Daniel excused himself from a conversation with several co-workers. "I'll be back in just a minute," he told them. Emily overheard his words but thought little of them. The groom had spent hours socializing without a break. It seemed perfectly reasonable that he might need a quiet moment before the evening speeches. Nearly 15 minutes passed. The wedding coordinator approached Emily holding a small stack of speech cards. "We're almost ready," she said. "Would you like to gather your mother? I believe she wanted to speak before your father." Emily accepted the cards with a grateful smile. Of course, she can't be far. Leaving the lively reception behind, Emily walked through the softly lit hallway connecting the ballroom to the guest suites. The cheerful music faded into distant echoes. The corridor felt surprisingly quiet compared to the celebration outside. Antique paintings decorated the walls while tall windows overlooked darkening gardens illuminated by lanterns. Emily checked the ladies' lounge first. Empty. She stepped onto the rear terrace. No sign of Victoria. Puzzled, she continued farther down the hallway, where several private bridal preparation rooms remained unlocked after the ceremony. One nearby door stood slightly open. She recognized it immediately. It was the bridal suite where she had prepared earlier that morning. Thinking her mother might simply be resting before the speeches, Emily approached quietly. Just before reaching the doorway, she heard hushed voices. One belonged unmistakably to Victoria. The other belonged to Daniel. Emily froze. She hesitated only a second before gently pushing the door open another few inches. Inside the softly lit room, Daniel stood only inches away from Victoria. Neither noticed Emily standing at the entrance. Victoria reached toward him, her hands resting briefly against his chest. Daniel responded by pulling her into a close embrace. It lasted only seconds. Yet to Emily, time seemed to stop completely. Neither spoke loudly enough for her to understand their conversation. She caught only scattered whispers carried through the silent room. "This can't continue. After tonight. I'm sorry. Victoria leaned her forehead against Daniel's shoulder. Emily's heart began pounding. Confusion crashed over her so suddenly that she questioned whether she had misunderstood what she was seeing. Perhaps someone was upset. Perhaps they were comforting each other over something unrelated. Yet every instinct warned her the moment was far too intimate. A floorboard creaked beneath her shoe. Both heads turned instantly. Daniel released Victoria so quickly it almost appeared instinctive. His face lost all color. "Emily," he said. Victoria stepped backward, smoothing her dress with visibly shaking hands. "Oh, sweetheart," she began quickly, "you startled us." Emily struggled to find words. I was looking for you." "For me?" Victoria asked, forcing a small laugh. "The speeches are about to begin." "Of course they are," Victoria replied. "Daniel was just helping me calm down." Emily looked from one face to the other. "Calm down?" Victoria nodded immediately. "I became emotional thinking about your grandmother. Being back in this room brought back memories from earlier today." Daniel finally spoke. "Your mom was overwhelmed. I didn't want her returning to the reception upset." Emily searched his expression. His explanation sounded reasonable. Almost. Still, something felt strangely rehearsed. Victoria gently touched Emily's arm. "You know how sentimental I get." Emily managed a weak smile. "I guess weddings do that." "They certainly do," Victoria answered. For several uncomfortable seconds, none of them moved. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "We should head back before everyone starts wondering where we disappeared to." Emily nodded automatically. The three walked back through the corridor together. Yet the silence between them felt far heavier than before. Victoria attempted light conversation about the upcoming speeches, while Daniel commented on the beautiful evening outside. Emily answered politely, but her thoughts remained trapped inside that quiet room. She replayed the embrace repeatedly. Perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps grief, stress, and emotion had simply created an awkward moment. She wanted desperately to believe that explanation. By the time they re-entered the brightly lit reception hall, smiling guests greeted them without noticing anything unusual. Music resumed, glasses were raised once more, and the celebration continued exactly as before. Emily forced herself to smile beside her husband and mother. But beneath that carefully maintained expression, a quiet seed of doubt had taken root. Before the night was over, she would find herself unable to ignore it any longer. Months before the wedding, long before Emily ever questioned the people she trusted most, another story had already begun unfolding beneath the surface of the Harper family. It was a story built not on sudden passion, but on years of silence, disappointment, and emotional distance. Looking back, investigators would later describe those months as the period when invisible choices quietly gathered enough weight to destroy several lives. Victoria Harper had once believed her marriage would last forever. When she married Thomas Harper nearly 3 decades earlier, they were deeply in love. They built a comfortable life together, welcomed Emily into the world, and gradually earned the admiration of friends who viewed them as the perfect family. Their home was filled with photographs from vacations, birthdays, anniversaries, and school celebrations. From the outside, everything appeared stable. Behind closed doors, however, time slowly replaced affection with routine. Thomas devoted himself almost entirely to expanding his construction business. Early mornings became late nights. Business trips became more frequent. Phone calls during dinner replaced meaningful conversations, while weekends disappeared beneath endless meetings and financial concerns. He provided generously for his family, believing hard work demonstrated love more effectively than words ever could. Victoria never questioned his dedication. She questioned his absence. At first, she tried encouraging small changes. "We haven't eaten dinner together in nearly a week," she once told him. Thomas barely looked up from his laptop. "I'll make it up to you after this project. There always seems to be another project. I'm doing this for us." Victoria smiled politely, although disappointment settled deeper each time those promises went unfulfilled. Months became years. Eventually she stopped asking. Loneliness entered quietly, disguising itself as acceptance. Emily noticed very little while growing up. Her parents rarely argued loudly. Their disagreements were polite, controlled, almost invisible. Birthdays were celebrated. Holidays were photographed. Family dinners still happened occasionally. Nothing suggested their marriage had become emotionally hollow. Victoria mastered appearing content. Only when she found herself alone did the emptiness become impossible to ignore. She spent afternoons gardening, volunteering at local charities, reading novels, and attending community events. Friends admired her grace and generosity, never realizing those activities merely filled long hours inside a home that felt increasingly silent. When Emily announced her engagement to Daniel Brooks, Victoria genuinely celebrated her daughter's happiness. Wedding planning quickly became the center of her life. She attended venue tours, selected flowers, coordinated decorations, and reviewed endless schedules with remarkable enthusiasm. For the first time in years, she felt needed. Daniel participated in nearly every planning session despite balancing a demanding career. Emily often joked that he cared about color palettes more than she did. "I just want everything perfect for you," Daniel would say. His attention impressed everyone, including Victoria. Their earliest conversations remained entirely innocent. While Emily met with photographers or caterers, Daniel occasionally stayed behind helping Victoria carry decorations or organize paperwork. They discussed guest lists, seating arrangements, family traditions, and wedding budgets. The conversations flowed naturally because both shared the same goal: giving Emily the happiest day possible. Daniel listened, really listened. Unlike Thomas, he asked questions. He remembered small details. He noticed when Victoria looked exhausted after spending entire days coordinating vendors. "You've done more for this wedding than anyone," he told her one afternoon. Victoria laughed softly. A mother never really stops taking care of her child. "Emily's lucky. So are you." Daniel smiled. "I hope I deserve her." Those words lingered with Victoria longer than she expected. Weeks passed. Planning meetings became increasingly frequent. Sometimes Emily arrived late because of work, leaving Daniel and Victoria alone for 30 or 40 minutes. They filled the waiting time with harmless conversation about books, travel, music, and family memories. Victoria found herself laughing again. It had been years since conversations felt so effortless. Daniel, meanwhile, discovered that Victoria understood him in ways Emily sometimes didn't. She encouraged him during stressful moments and reassured him whenever wedding expenses became overwhelming. Neither recognized how emotional dependence quietly replaced ordinary friendship. One rainy afternoon, after a difficult disagreement between Emily and Daniel over wedding finances, Victoria found Daniel sitting alone outside the venue. "You look miserable," she observed. "I disappointed Emily." "You had an argument. We'll work it out." Victoria sat beside him. "Marriage isn't about avoiding disagreements. What is it about?" She paused before answering, feeling seen. Daniel considered those words carefully. "I don't always feel that." Victoria lowered her eyes. "Neither did I." Silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. That single conversation marked the beginning of a dangerous emotional boundary neither intended to cross. Afterward, they exchanged occasional messages discussing wedding updates. Soon the conversations expanded beyond schedules. They asked about each other's days, shared frustrations, offered encouragement. When one felt overwhelmed, the other always replied. Neither message appeared romantic. Yet both increasingly depended upon those conversations. Victoria knew the attachment was wrong. Each night she promised herself she would end the friendship. Each morning another message appeared. Daniel struggled with similar guilt. He loved Emily. He never doubted that. Yet Victoria provided emotional comfort he hadn't expected to need. Instead of creating distance, both convinced themselves nothing inappropriate had happened. They never planned an affair. They rationalized every conversation. Eventually, the first embrace occurred after Victoria broke down while describing the loneliness inside her marriage. Daniel simply tried comforting her. The hug lasted only seconds. Neither mentioned it afterward. Yet neither forgot it. From that day forward, restraint became increasingly difficult. They never discussed leaving their relationships, never imagined building a future together. Instead, they created a dangerous illusion built upon temporary escape from loneliness. As Emily happily finalized invitations, selected music, and counted the days until her wedding, the two people she trusted most silently carried growing guilt behind carefully practiced smiles. Weeks before the ceremony, Victoria finally confronted the reality she could no longer ignore. "This has to end," she whispered during one private conversation. Daniel nodded immediately. "It will." "When?" He looked toward the nearly completed wedding decorations surrounding them. "After the wedding." Neither realized that delaying goodbye until one perfect day would become the worst decision either of them would ever make. The promise that everything would end after the wedding remained known only to Victoria and Daniel. Emily, however, knew nothing about their private agreement. She only knew that the image she had accidentally witnessed inside the bridal suite refused to leave her mind. Every smile they exchanged afterward seemed slightly forced. Every casual glance carried a meaning she could no longer ignore. Although the reception continued with cheerful speeches and dancing, a quiet uneasiness settled deep inside her heart. She tried convincing herself she had misunderstood. Perhaps Victoria had simply become emotional. Perhaps Daniel had only been comforting her. Perhaps the entire moment looked more intimate than it truly was. Those explanations sounded reasonable whenever she repeated them in her mind. Yet each attempt to dismiss her doubts lasted only a few minutes before the memory returned with unsettling clarity. The wedding celebrations finally ended shortly after midnight. Guests gradually departed with hugs, photographs, and promises to stay in touch. Emily and Daniel checked into the luxury honeymoon suite reserved within the estate before leaving for their planned vacation the following morning. Daniel appeared exhausted. "So," he said while removing his jacket, "we survived." Emily smiled faintly. "Barely. You don't sound very happy." "I'm just tired." He accepted the answer without pressing further. That surprised her. Normally Daniel always noticed when something bothered her. Instead, he showered quickly, wished her good night, and fell asleep almost immediately. Emily remained awake. She watched the ceiling for nearly an hour, replaying every detail from earlier that evening. Eventually she turned toward Daniel, whose phone rested on the bedside table beside his wallet. She had never searched through his belongings before. The thought alone made her uncomfortable. Trust had always been the foundation of their relationship. Tonight that foundation no longer felt solid. Carefully, she picked up the phone. The screen required only a fingerprint because Daniel had once added hers for convenience. Her hands trembled. She opened the messaging application. Nothing appeared unusual. Conversations with coworkers, friends, family members, wedding vendors. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, almost too ordinary. Emily frowned. Daniel rarely deleted anything. She opened the recently deleted folder. Empty. Not a single deleted conversation remained. She searched older message backups stored automatically in the cloud. Several dates contained noticeable gaps where conversations should have existed. Someone had erased entire message threads. Emily stared silently at the screen. Daniel had never mentioned deleting anything before. She quietly locked the phone and placed it back exactly where she had found it. Sleep became impossible. The following morning they left for a lakeside honeymoon resort several hours away. Friends described it as peaceful and romantic, but Emily struggled to enjoy the beautiful scenery. Daniel behaved lovingly throughout the drive, pointing out mountain views and making plans for future anniversaries. His kindness only deepened her confusion. If he had betrayed her, why did he still seem genuinely devoted? If he hadn't, why delete messages? She found no satisfying answer. During breakfast on their second morning away, Daniel excused himself after his phone vibrated. "I need to take this. Work? Probably." He stepped outside onto the balcony before answering. Emily watched through the window. His voice remained low. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When he returned, she asked casually, "Everything okay?" "Just a supplier asking about Monday." She nodded. Something about the explanation felt incomplete. Over the next several days, similar calls continued. Always late in the evening. Always answered privately. Always ending with brief explanations. Emily never confronted him. Instead, she quietly observed. When they returned home after the honeymoon, ordinary routines resumed. Daniel returned to work. Emily unpacked wedding gifts and organized thank you cards. Life appeared normal. Inside, however, suspicion continued growing. One afternoon, Daniel left his laptop open while taking a shower. Emily had no intention of searching through it. At least that was what she told herself. Then she remembered the deleted messages. Slowly she opened his banking records. Most transactions appeared ordinary. Mortgage payments, restaurant bills, wedding expenses, groceries. Then one payment caught her attention. $3,000 transferred electronically 6 weeks before the wedding. The recipient's name had been partially hidden. Only the initials V.H. remained visible. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Victoria Harper, her own mother. Perhaps it reimbursed wedding costs. Perhaps it meant absolutely nothing. Still, Daniel had never mentioned sending Victoria money. She checked older statements. Another payment, smaller this time, $800. Again addressed only to V.H. Emily closed the laptop immediately as footsteps approached the bedroom. Daniel emerged, drying his hair. "What are you doing?" She forced a smile. "Looking for our travel insurance documents. They're in the drawer." He leaned over, opened the correct drawer, and handed them to her without suspicion. Emily thanked him while quietly wondering how many other secrets remained hidden. Days later, she visited Victoria under the excuse of delivering leftover wedding photographs. Her mother welcomed her warmly. "You look tired," Victoria observed. "Honeymoons can be exhausting." Victoria laughed gently. "I hope it was worth it. It was nice." Emily studied her mother's face carefully. Nothing seemed unusual. Victoria offered tea, discussed neighbors, admired wedding pictures, and spoke proudly about the ceremony. Not once did she mention Daniel beyond ordinary compliments. Before leaving, Emily noticed Victoria's phone vibrating repeatedly on the kitchen counter. The screen lit briefly. No contact name appeared, only an unfamiliar number. Victoria quickly turned the phone over before answering. "I'll call back later," she said after rejecting the call. Emily pretended not to notice. That evening curiosity overwhelmed restraint. Using an online phone directory, she entered the unfamiliar number she had memorized moments earlier. No registered owner appeared, only a prepaid mobile account. Later that night, Daniel received another private call. Again he stepped outside. Emily quietly walked toward the living room window. She could hear only fragments. "No, not now." A pause. "I already transferred it." Another pause. "We agreed this would stop." Emily's pulse raced. Transferred what? Who was calling? When Daniel returned, she asked nothing. Instead, she watched him set the phone face down on the table before kissing her forehead as though nothing unusual had happened. Unable to sleep, Emily gathered every troubling detail inside a notebook she kept hidden beneath spare blankets. Deleted conversations, private calls, bank transfers, her mother's mysterious behavior. Individually, each clue seemed harmless. Together, they painted a picture she desperately hoped was incomplete. The greatest fear wasn't discovering that Daniel had betrayed her. It was realizing the betrayal might have begun long before he ever placed a wedding ring on her finger. With every passing day, another piece of trust quietly disappeared, and Emily knew she could no longer remain a silent observer for much longer. For days, Emily had tried convincing herself that the clues she collected could still be explained away. She wanted desperately to believe that the deleted messages, mysterious phone calls, hidden bank transfers, and private meetings formed an innocent misunderstanding. Instead, every answer only created another question. By the time the wedding estate contacted the couple about collecting a forgotten gift box left behind after the reception, Emily made a quiet decision. She would return with Daniel to the place where her doubts had first begun. And before they left again, she would finally demand the truth. The countryside estate looked strangely different without music, laughter, or hundreds of smiling guests. Flower arrangements had been removed, tables stacked away, and the ballroom stood almost empty. Only a handful of employees remained, quietly cleaning the property after the celebration that had seemed so perfect only days earlier. Daniel carried the gift box toward their reserved suite while Emily followed silently. "You've hardly spoken all morning," he said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "You already know." He stopped walking. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel sighed. "Emily, please don't do this today." She looked directly into his eyes. "Then tell me I imagined everything." He opened his mouth. No words came. Inside the honeymoon suite, Emily quietly closed the door behind them. The silence felt heavier than any argument they had ever shared. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the same room where they had celebrated becoming husband and wife only days earlier. Now it felt unfamiliar. She placed her notebook on the table. Daniel immediately recognized it. "What's that?" "My answers." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily slowly opened the notebook. "I saw deleted messages." Daniel's expression changed. "I found payments sent to my mother." He remained silent. "I watched you take secret phone calls." Still nothing. "And I saw both of you together in the bridal suite." Her voice finally broke. "So tell me the truth." Daniel lowered his head. "You searched my phone." "I searched because you gave me reasons. You invaded my privacy. You destroyed my trust." The words echoed through the room. Daniel walked toward the window, rubbing both hands across his face. "It isn't what you think." Emily laughed bitterly. "That's exactly what everyone says before they admit everything." He turned back slowly. "I never wanted you to find out this way." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. There was something to find. Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes." The single word struck harder than any scream. Emily stepped backward. "No. I'm sorry. No. I never meant to hurt you." She shook her head repeatedly. "Don't apologize." "Emily, answer me." Daniel struggled to meet her eyes. It started during the wedding planning. Her breathing became shallow. "How long?" "Several months." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "Months? It wasn't supposed to happen." "You expect that to help?" "It wasn't physical at first." Her voice rose. "So it became physical later?" Daniel remained silent. Emily already knew the answer. Tears filled her eyes. "My own mother." "I know. My own mother." He stepped closer. "Please listen." She immediately backed away. "Don't touch me." Daniel stopped. "We talked." Emily laughed through tears. "You hugged." He swallowed. "Yes." "You loved her?" "No." "You expect me to believe that?" "I loved you." "Then why?" Daniel's shoulders slumped beneath invisible guilt. "She understood things I never talked about." Emily stared at him. "So you cheated because someone listened?" "It wasn't that simple." "It never is." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "Your father ignored her for years." Emily blinked. "What does my father have to do with your choices?" "She was lonely." "So you decided to comfort her?" "I crossed a line." "You crossed every line." Silence filled the room again. Daniel finally whispered, "We agreed it would end after the wedding." Emily almost couldn't process the sentence. "You planned to marry me anyway?" "I thought ending it meant we could move forward." "You built our marriage on a lie." "I believed I could fix it." "You don't fix betrayal by hiding it." Daniel lowered his face into his hands. "I know." Emily walked toward the door before stopping. "I need to hear this from her." As if summoned by those words, a soft knock echoed through the suite. Both turned simultaneously. Emily opened the door. Victoria stood outside holding the forgotten family bracelet Emily had left behind after the ceremony. Her gentle smile disappeared immediately upon seeing their faces. Perhaps this isn't a good time." Emily held the bracelet without taking it. "Come in." Victoria hesitated. "Emily, come inside." Her voice carried no emotion. Victoria obeyed. She quietly closed the door behind her. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Finally, Emily asked, "How long?" Victoria looked toward Daniel. He slowly nodded. There isn't any point hiding it now. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. Answer me. Victoria struggled to breathe. Several months. Emily closed her eyes. So everything was real. Emily, were you ever going to tell me? Victoria whispered. No. The honesty hurt more than another lie. I couldn't destroy your happiness. Emily looked at her in disbelief. You already did. Victoria began crying openly. I never wanted this. You had countless chances to stop. I tried. When? Victoria glanced toward Daniel. We promised each other it would end after the wedding. Emily laughed bitterly. That sentence keeps getting worse every time I hear it. Daniel remained silent. Victoria wiped away tears. I was lonely. Emily answered immediately. I was your daughter. I know. You were supposed to protect me. I failed. You chose him. Victoria covered her face. I hate myself. Emily's voice hardened. No. Both looked up. You hate getting caught. Victoria flinched. That's not true. Then why didn't you confess before I found out? Neither answered. The silence became its own confession. Emily looked from her husband to her mother, realizing they had shared months of secrets while she excitedly planned the happiest day of her life. Every memory suddenly felt poisoned. Dress fittings, family dinners, wedding rehearsals, smiles in photographs. All of them now carried hidden meanings she had never seen. Another painful truth surfaced. What were the payments? Victoria slowly lowered her hands. I asked Daniel for money. Emily stared. Why? I had debts. What kind of debts? Victoria hesitated. Daniel interrupted quietly. Emily. There's more. She turned toward him. What more? Before either could answer, another knock sounded loudly at the suite door. This time it wasn't gentle. All three froze. None of them yet realized that before the day ended, the secrets inside that room would spill far beyond their broken family, leading directly toward violence, bloodshed, and a murder that would shock everyone who had celebrated the wedding only days before. The sharp knock at the honeymoon suite door shattered the suffocating silence. Emily, Daniel, and Victoria exchanged uneasy glances, each expecting the interruption to be nothing more than a hotel employee. No one moved for several seconds. Finally, Daniel stepped toward the entrance and opened it. A young staff member stood outside holding a clipboard. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said politely. The manager wanted to confirm the pickup of the remaining wedding gifts. We also found a few personal items that may belong to your family. Daniel forced a smile. We'll be down shortly. The employee nodded and walked away. The moment the door closed again, the fragile calm disappeared. Emily turned toward her mother. You said there was more. Victoria looked exhausted. I don't think this is the place. No, Emily answered firmly. This is exactly the place. Daniel spoke quietly. Maybe we should all go home and talk somewhere private. Emily shook her head. No more hiding. Victoria slowly placed the bracelet onto the nearby table. I need a few minutes. To do what? To think. Emily folded her arms. You've had months to think. Victoria lowered her eyes. I know. Without another word, she quietly walked toward the door. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. Victoria. She stopped without turning around. Please don't follow me. The door closed softly behind her. Emily remained frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Daniel looked torn between staying with his wife and going after Victoria. I should make sure she's okay. Emily laughed bitterly. Of course you should. Emily, go. Daniel hesitated only briefly before leaving the suite. Emily stood alone. For the first time since her wedding ceremony, complete silence surrounded her. The room that had once represented love now felt unbearably empty. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the bracelet Victoria had left behind. Several minutes passed. She considered calling her father, then decided against it. He knew nothing. Not yet. Outside the suite, Daniel searched the quiet corridors. The estate had become almost deserted after cleanup crews finished their work. Only a handful of employees remained inside the sprawling building. Victoria? He called softly. No answer. He checked the terrace overlooking the gardens. Empty. He searched the library. Nothing. Finally, he walked toward the ballroom, remembering that Victoria often disappeared there during emotional moments. At the opposite end of the estate, Victoria wandered alone through the dimly lit hallway connecting the ballroom to the reception entrance. Pieces of wedding decorations still remained stacked against the walls. White flower petals covered sections of the polished floor where guests had celebrated only days earlier. She stopped beside a large window overlooking the gardens. Her reflection stared back at her. A mother. A wife. A woman who had destroyed her daughter's happiness. Tears quietly rolled down her face. I never wanted this, she whispered to herself. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind her. Victoria slowly turned. The hallway appeared empty. Who's there? Only silence answered. She continued walking. Again she heard footsteps. This time closer. Her breathing became uneven. Hello? No response. The corridor lights flickered briefly before stabilizing again. Victoria reached for her phone. Before she could unlock it, a sudden movement emerged from the shadows. Her eyes widened. You! The rest of her sentence vanished beneath a gasp. Back inside the suite, Emily finally decided she couldn't remain alone any longer. She stepped into the hallway just as distant screams echoed from somewhere below. One scream, then another. Hotel employees began running toward the ballroom. Confused, Emily hurried after them. Daniel heard the commotion from another corridor and immediately broke into a run. The closer he came, the louder the shouting became. Someone yelled for an ambulance. Another shouted for security. Emily reached the ballroom entrance seconds before Daniel. A terrified hotel employee stumbled backward into the hallway, shaking uncontrollably. Don't go in, she cried. Oh my God! Emily pushed past her. The sight stopped her instantly. Victoria Harper lay motionless across the polished marble floor surrounded by scattered white roses and torn wedding ribbons. Crimson blood spread beneath her body, staining the elegant decorations that had symbolized celebration only days before. The family bracelet rested only a few feet away. Emily couldn't breathe. Mom! Her voice barely emerged. She dropped to her knees beside Victoria. Hotel security immediately pulled her back. You can't touch her. Emily struggled against them. That's my mother. Daniel stood frozen several steps away. His face became completely colorless. No. Paramedics rushed into the ballroom moments later. One quickly checked Victoria's pulse. Another examined the severe injuries. After only seconds, they exchanged silent looks. Emily understood before anyone spoke. Victoria was gone. The hallway filled with police officers securing the scene. Guests who had returned to collect forgotten belongings watched in horror as yellow tape sealed off the ballroom entrance. Wedding decorations remained untouched around the growing crime scene. Crystal glasses still decorated nearby tables. A banner congratulating the newlyweds hung only yards away from the body. The contrast felt almost impossible to comprehend. A detective from the first responding unit approached Emily. I'm very sorry. She stared blankly. When did this happen? We're trying to determine that. Another officer interrupted. Sir. The detective turned. We can't locate the husband. Emily looked up immediately. What? The groom. He was just here. We've searched the immediate area. Daniel was nowhere in sight. His phone went unanswered. His vehicle remained parked outside. Yet he had completely vanished. Within minutes, whispers spread throughout the estate. He argued with her. They were together. Someone saw them leave. Suspicion grew rapidly. To every witness present, Daniel Brooks had both motive and opportunity. By evening, local detectives officially classified him as the primary suspect in Victoria Harper's murder. News of the killing spread quickly across the county. A wedding that had already become the subject of private gossip now transformed into a homicide investigation. Television crews gathered outside the estate. Reporters questioned guests leaving the property. Neighbors described the Harper family as respectable and quiet. No one understood how a joyful wedding had ended in bloodshed. The following morning, Detective Rachel Bennett arrived to assume control of the investigation. Known for remaining calm under intense public pressure, Bennett quietly studied every detail before speaking to anyone. She walked slowly through the ballroom, examining the preserved decorations, bloodstains, and scattered evidence. Crime scene photographers continued documenting every angle, while forensic specialists collected fingerprints, fibers, shoe impressions, and traces of biological material. Rachel paused beside the abandoned family bracelet. "Stayed here," she murmured. One forensic technician nodded. "Looks intentional." "Maybe." She continued surveying the hallway. The crime scene felt strangely staged. Too many details appeared almost deliberate. Detective Bennett requested complete guest lists, security footage, financial records, and phone histories connected to everyone involved in the wedding. As interviews began, a disturbing pattern quickly emerged. Daniel had reasons to fear exposure. Thomas Harper had unknowingly lived inside a broken marriage for years. Several relatives quietly admitted long-standing financial disputes involving Victoria. Wedding vendors described tense private meetings. Even close friends hinted that Victoria possessed secrets capable of destroying multiple lives. By the end of her first day, Detective Bennett closed her notebook slowly. Nearly everyone connected to the wedding had a reason to resent Victoria Harper. Finding her killer would require untangling years of lies, betrayals, hidden debts, and buried family wounds. Because beneath the perfect wedding photographs, every smiling face had begun to look like a possible murderer. By the end of her first day, Detective Rachel Bennett understood that Victoria Harper's murder would not be solved through assumptions alone. Daniel Brooks might have disappeared immediately after the killing, making him the obvious suspect, but experience had taught her that the most convincing explanation was often the one someone wanted investigators to believe. The ballroom still carried traces of celebration, yet beneath the polished floors and elegant decorations lay years of concealed resentment waiting to be uncovered. Early the following morning, Bennett established a temporary command center inside one of the estate's conference rooms. Photographs from the crime scene covered an entire wall. Guest lists, seating charts, financial records, and timelines filled a large whiteboard. Every person who attended the wedding became a potential witness, or a potential suspect. Emily Harper arrived first. She looked exhausted. Her wedding dress had been replaced by simple black clothing, and her eyes reflected the grief of someone who had lost both a mother and a marriage within the same 24 hours. Bennett offered her a cup of coffee. "You don't have to rush." Emily nodded weakly. "I'll answer whatever you need." The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. Emily described the embrace she had witnessed between Victoria and Daniel inside the bridal suite. She admitted searching Daniel's phone, discovering deleted conversations, unexplained bank transfers, and mysterious late-night calls. She also revealed the confrontation inside the honeymoon suite shortly before Victoria left alone. "Did your husband threaten your mother?" Bennett asked. "No." "Did they argue?" "They both admitted the affair. And after that, my mother walked out." Emily lowered her head. Daniel followed her. "Did you see them together again?" "No." Bennett carefully noted every detail. When the interview ended, she believed Emily was telling the truth. Whether Emily knew the entire truth remained another question. Thomas Harper entered next. Unlike his daughter, he appeared emotionally numb rather than openly devastated. "I never imagined this," he said quietly. Bennett studied him. "Tell me about your marriage." Thomas hesitated. "We weren't perfect." "Were you separated?" "No." "Happy?" He looked toward the floor. "I thought we were." Bennett explained the affair. Thomas remained silent for nearly a full minute. Finally he whispered, "Victoria never told me." "Were you aware of financial problems?" "What financial problems?" "The money Daniel transferred." Thomas frowned. "I don't know anything about that." His surprise appeared genuine. Still, Bennett requested complete access to the couple's financial records. The interviews continued throughout the afternoon. Wedding coordinator Melissa Grant recalled seeing Victoria arguing with someone near the rear gardens shortly before the murder. Was it Daniel? Couldn't tell. Why not? The person wore a dark jacket with the hood up. Another employee insisted Daniel had entered the ballroom corridor alone. A waiter claimed he never saw Daniel there at all. Two photographers offered completely different timelines regarding Victoria's final movements. None of the witness statements matched perfectly. Each contradiction complicated the investigation. Later that day, Bennett questioned Mark Sullivan, Daniel's closest friend. When did you last speak with Daniel? Just before the speeches. How did he seem? Nervous. Nervous about marriage? Mark hesitated. No. What then? I think he was afraid of someone. Who? I don't know. Did he ever mention Victoria? Mark sighed heavily. Only once. What did he say? He told me people sometimes make terrible mistakes trying to help lonely people. Bennett wrote down the sentence exactly as spoken. It sounded less like an excuse, more like regret. Meanwhile, forensic investigators examined security cameras installed throughout the estate. Most recordings appeared normal. Guests arriving, employees cleaning, vehicles entering and leaving. Then the technicians reached the critical period surrounding Victoria's death. 3 separate cameras unexpectedly stopped recording. The outage lasted exactly 9 minutes. When the footage resumed, Victoria already lay in the hallway. Bennett frowned. Equipment failure? The security manager shook his head. Impossible. Why? The cameras are connected to independent backup power. So someone shut them down manually. It appears that way. The missing footage instantly changed the investigation. Someone familiar with the property had deliberately created a blind spot. Whether that person was Daniel remained unknown. Digital forensic specialists made another troubling discovery. Several anonymous text messages had been sent during the reception. One reached Daniel's phone minutes before he disappeared. Meet me now. She knows everything. Another arrived on Victoria's phone. He's ready to confess. Come alone. A third anonymous message reached Emily. Your husband isn't where he says he is. Emily never noticed it because her phone remained inside her purse during the confrontation. None of the messages originated from registered phone numbers. All had been sent through prepaid devices impossible to identify immediately. Bennett leaned back thoughtfully. Someone wanted all 3 of them moving. A detective beside her nodded. Toward each other. Or toward the murder. Phone records revealed additional surprises. Victoria had exchanged dozens of calls with an unknown prepaid number during the previous 6 months. Daniel received calls from the same number. Even Thomas Harper had received 2 unanswered calls weeks before the wedding. The mystery deepened further after financial investigators reviewed Victoria's banking history. Multiple cash deposits had appeared over several months. No clear source existed. Then the withdrawals began. Thousands of dollars disappeared shortly before the wedding. No invoices, no explanations, only missing money. Bennett visited Victoria's bank manager personally. Did she ever mention why she needed cash? No. Anyone accompany her? Sometimes. Who? The manager checked surveillance records. We're trying to identify the person. Every answer generated another unanswered question. Late that evening, another detective entered Bennett's office carrying fresh evidence. You need to hear this. He placed a recorded voicemail onto the computer. The voice belonged to Victoria. If anything happens to me, it isn't because of Daniel. The recording ended abruptly. Bennett replayed it twice. When was this sent? It never was. What? It stayed saved as a draft. Date? The morning of the wedding. Silence filled the room. If Victoria feared something before the ceremony even began, then her murder had likely been planned long before Emily discovered the affair. Another report arrived moments later. Forensic analysts identified an unidentified fingerprint near the ballroom window. It belonged to neither Daniel nor Victoria, nor Emily, nor Thomas. Someone else had been standing inside the hallway shortly before the murder. The investigation shifted once again. Detective Bennett walked alone through the now empty ballroom, studying the silent corridor where Victoria had taken her final steps. The polished floor reflected the soft overhead lights, making the abandoned space seem almost peaceful. Yet nothing about the case felt simple anymore. An affair had become only one piece of a far larger puzzle. Blackmail. hidden payments, anonymous messages, disabled cameras, a vanished suspect, an unknown fingerprint. Every discovery pushed the truth farther away instead of bringing it closer. Standing beside the blood-stained hallway, Bennett quietly reached a disturbing conclusion. Someone had spent months carefully arranging events so that when Victoria Harper finally died, the entire world would blame Daniel Brooks before investigators ever had the chance to ask who truly benefited from her silence. Detective Rachel Bennett left the ballroom convinced that Victoria Harper's affair had distracted everyone from a far older and more dangerous secret. Every clue collected during the previous 48 hours pointed away from a crime of passion and toward something carefully organized long before Emily's wedding invitations had ever been mailed. Daniel Brooks remained missing, but the growing evidence suggested someone had manipulated both his emotions and the public's assumptions to ensure he appeared guilty from the very beginning. The unidentified fingerprint recovered from the ballroom window became the investigation's highest priority. Forensic analysts compared it against every wedding guest, hotel employee, and contractor who had entered the estate during the previous month. No match. Bennett widened the search. The print was submitted through the National Criminal Database. 2 days later, a result appeared. The fingerprint belonged to a man named Gregory Wells. The name meant nothing to Emily, nothing to Thomas Harper, nothing to Daniel's co-workers. Yet when detectives searched Victoria's personal records, they found Gregory's name hidden inside an old notebook stored in the back of a locked filing cabinet. Beside his name appeared only 3 handwritten words. He remembers everything. Bennett immediately ordered a background investigation. Gregory Wells, now 64 years old, lived quietly in a neighboring county. He had once worked as an accountant for a manufacturing company that unexpectedly closed nearly 30 years earlier after one of its executives disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Officially, the executive had been declared missing. Unofficially, investigators had suspected foul play. No body had ever been recovered. The case eventually went cold. Bennett requested every archive document related to the disappearance. Dust-covered boxes soon arrived from police storage. Hours passed as detectives sorted through aging reports, faded photographs, and handwritten witness interviews. One document immediately caught Bennett's attention. Among the listed witnesses was a young office assistant, Victoria Collins, Victoria Harper's maiden name. She had never mentioned it. Another witness statement referenced Gregory Wells. Neither had been considered suspects. Instead, both claimed the missing executive had left town voluntarily. The statements appeared almost identical. Too identical. Bennett circled several matching phrases. Someone had coached them. Investigators located Gregory that same evening. He appeared nervous the moment detectives introduced themselves. "I've done nothing wrong. We only have questions," Bennett replied calmly. Gregory agreed to accompany them voluntarily. During questioning, he admitted knowing Victoria decades earlier. "We worked together. When did you last see her?" "Years ago." Bennett placed recent phone records onto the table. "They suggest otherwise." Gregory stared silently at the documents. "You spoke dozens of times during the last 6 months." His shoulders slumped. "Couldn't avoid her." "Why?" "Because she wouldn't let me." The room fell silent. Gregory slowly explained. Nearly 30 years earlier, the missing executive had discovered an extensive embezzlement scheme involving several senior employees. Gregory had participated. So had another man. Victoria accidentally witnessed a violent confrontation inside the company warehouse. The executive died during the struggle. His death had never been planned. The body disappeared. Gregory and the other employee escaped prosecution after convincing investigators the victim had simply vanished. Victoria never reported what she saw. Instead, she accepted money in exchange for silence. "I was young," Gregory whispered. "I was terrified. And afterward, I wanted to forget." But Victoria remembered. Gregory nodded miserably. Every year, he described receiving occasional letters demanding additional payments. The amounts gradually increased. Victoria never threatened public exposure directly. She only reminded him that memories could become evidence. When Gregory retired, the demands intensified. Wedding expenses finally pushed Victoria into requesting even larger sums. Bennett understood immediately. The bank transfers from Daniel had covered only part of Victoria's debts. The remaining money came from decades of blackmail. Yet something still felt incomplete. If you paid her, Bennett asked, why kill her now? Gregory looked genuinely confused. I didn't. You were at the wedding. Yes. Your fingerprint was inside the hallway. I met her there. Why? She wanted more money. What happened? We argued. Then, I walked away. Can anyone confirm that? No. His story remained possible. But Bennett sensed he still withheld something. Search warrants soon followed. Detectives searched Victoria's home from attic to basement. Inside an old cedar chest beneath family photo albums, they discovered a bundle of letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. Most contained handwritten payment demands addressed to Gregory. One final envelope remained unopened. Across the front, Victoria had written only one sentence. If anything happens to me, open this. Inside rested a detailed confession. Victoria admitted accepting money for decades. She confessed hiding evidence connected to the executive's death. Most importantly, she identified Gregory's unknown partner. It wasn't Gregory Wells. It was Richard Kane, the company's former financial director. Bennett immediately checked government records. Richard Kane had changed his surname 15 years earlier. His new identity stunned everyone. Richard Kane was now Richard Bennett, not related to Detective Bennett. He owned a successful security consulting business. More importantly, his company had installed the surveillance cameras inside the wedding estate only 3 months before Emily's ceremony. Suddenly, the missing footage made perfect sense. Detectives raced toward Richard's office. It had already been abandoned. His home stood empty. Neighbors reported seeing him leave early that morning carrying several suitcases. He looked frightened, one neighbor recalled. An arrest warrant was issued immediately. Meanwhile, digital analysts finally restored deleted files recovered from Victoria's damaged mobile phone. Among them appeared an audio recording created only hours before the wedding ceremony. Victoria's trembling voice filled the laboratory speakers. If you're hearing this, then something has gone terribly wrong. She paused, struggling to steady her breathing. I can't keep protecting him anymore. Richard believes I'll stay silent forever. But I'm finished paying for mistakes that never belonged only to me. Another pause. I'm telling Gregory everything ends today. After Emily's wedding, I'll go to the police. If Richard learns that, he'll kill me. The recording ended with the sound of a door opening. Then silence. Every detective in the room exchanged uneasy looks. The murder had not been born from forbidden love. The affair merely forced Victoria to accelerate plans she had delayed for decades. Richard, realizing she intended to confess after the wedding, had acted before she could destroy him. Later that evening, highway patrol officers located Richard's abandoned vehicle near an isolated marina. Inside, they discovered blood-stained clothing, surveillance equipment, burner phones used to send anonymous messages, and software capable of disabling security cameras remotely. One item remained especially revealing: a handwritten timeline. Every major event surrounding the wedding had been carefully scheduled. Daniel's anonymous messages, Victoria's meeting, the camera outage, everything. Only one line remained unchecked. Victoria eliminated. Detective Bennett quietly closed the notebook. Months of planning had collapsed because one frightened woman finally chose truth over silence. Now only one task remained. Finding Richard Bennett before desperation pushed him toward another irreversible act. Ensuring the final confrontation would determine whether decades of buried guilt ended with justice or claimed yet another innocent life. Richard Bennett's abandoned vehicle confirmed everything Detective Rachel Bennett had begun to suspect. The blood-stained clothing, burner phones, surveillance software, and handwritten timeline transformed a complicated investigation into a desperate manhunt. Yet one question continued haunting every investigator. If Richard had planned Victoria Harper's death for months, where would he run after abandoning his carefully constructed identity? The answer arrived before sunrise. A highway patrol officer reported a small fishing cabin registered under one of Richard's former business partners. The property stood deep within a remote forest nearly 2 hours from the wedding estate. Surrounded by dense pine trees and bordered by a quiet lake, the cabin had only one narrow road leading in or out. Rachel studied an aerial photograph. He picked isolation. Another detective nodded. And plenty of time to see us coming. Within an hour, police vehicles quietly surrounded the area. Tactical officers positioned themselves behind trees while negotiators prepared loudspeakers. Every movement remained deliberate. Richard had already demonstrated months of careful planning. No one wanted to underestimate him now. Rachel stepped forward wearing a protective vest. She lifted a megaphone. "Richard, this is Detective Rachel Bennett." "Silence. We know you're inside." "Still nothing. We're not leaving." Nearly a full minute passed before the front curtain shifted slightly. A tired face appeared behind the dusty glass. Richard looked older than his official photographs. Sleepless nights and constant fear had drained the confidence he once carried so naturally. The front door slowly opened. He stepped onto the porch with empty hands raised. "I wasn't going to run forever." Rachel kept her voice steady. "Then let's finish this peacefully." Richard laughed bitterly. "Peacefully?" His eyes wandered across the surrounding officers. "There hasn't been peace for 30 years. You can explain everything. I already know what everyone thinks. I'd rather hear what actually happened." Richard remained silent for several seconds before lowering himself into an old wooden chair on the porch. "You came all this way." Rachel nodded. "I'm listening." The tactical team maintained their positions while Rachel carefully approached, stopping several yards away. Richard stared across the still lake. "I never wanted anyone to die." Rachel answered quietly. "But someone did." "Yes, the executive." Richard closed his eyes. "He discovered the money. You and Gregory were stealing. We weren't rich men. So you murdered him." Richard shook his head immediately. "No. What happened?" "He threatened to expose everything." Rachel waited. "We argued." His breathing grew heavier. "He pushed Gregory. And then pushed him back." Richard's voice cracked. He hit the concrete floor. Silence settled between them. I checked for a pulse. Rachel already knew the answer. There wasn't one. Richard nodded slowly. "We panicked. You hid the body." "Yes. And Victoria witnessed everything. She wasn't supposed to." Richard rubbed trembling hands together. "I thought she'd tell police. But she didn't." "No." Rachel looked directly at him. "She accepted money. First." He laughed without humor. "Then she discovered fear could become profit." Richard described years of quiet payments, hidden meetings, anonymous letters, and endless demands. "Every time I believed it was finished, another envelope arrived. You could have gone to police." "And confessed?" Rachel remained silent. "I would have lost everything. So you let Victoria control your life." "I thought I deserved it." His expression hardened. "Until she wanted more." "The wedding." Richard nodded. "She said the debts were growing." Rachel remembered Daniel's bank transfers. "She asked everyone for money." "I wasn't everyone." Richard's eyes filled with anger. "I was her insurance policy." He stood slowly. "For 30 years she reminded me that one sentence from her could destroy dozens of lives." Rachel answered carefully. "Instead you destroyed hers." Richard's face twisted with emotion. "You don't understand. Help me." "She ruined Gregory." He pointed toward the ground. "She ruined me." Another deep breath. "She nearly ruined Daniel." Rachel frowned. "Daniel wasn't involved." "No." "Then why send anonymous messages?" Richard smiled sadly. "People believe the obvious story. You framed him." "I only helped everyone reach the conclusion they already wanted." Rachel remained calm. "You manipulated Emily too." His shoulders lowered. "I never intended to hurt her." "You murdered her mother." "I stopped a monster." Rachel shook her head. "You killed a woman preparing to confess." Richard looked surprised. "Confess?" "We recovered her recording." His expression changed instantly. "What recording?" "She planned to tell police everything after the wedding." Richard stared silently. "No, She named you. No. And herself. He slowly sat back down. She was finally going to tell the truth. Rachel nodded. Yes. Richard covered his face. I didn't know. For months you planned her murder. I believed she'd never stop. Rachel stepped one pace closer. You never gave her the chance. Tears slipped through Richard's fingers. I spent 30 years waiting for another blackmail letter. His voice barely remained audible. I couldn't imagine another ending. Rachel spoke gently. You created the ending yourself. Minutes passed without anyone moving. Finally, Richard lowered his hands. I've replayed that hallway 1,000 times. He stared at the cabin floor. She recognized me immediately. Rachel listened. She said it was over. Another painful pause. She reached into her purse. You thought she had evidence. I thought she was calling police. What was she reaching for? Richard closed his eyes. The confession. Rachel already knew. I struck her before she could speak. The words echoed through the silent forest. Every officer present understood they had just heard the confession they needed. Rachel lowered her weapon. It's over. Richard nodded weakly. I know. He slowly stood. Without resistance, he placed his hands behind his back. Officers approached cautiously before securing the handcuffs. Richard never looked away from the lake. I spent 3 decades hiding one death. He whispered quietly. In the end, I caused another. Weeks later, the trial concluded with overwhelming evidence. Richard Bennett pleaded guilty to Victoria Harper's murder and accepted responsibility for his role in concealing the decades-old homicide. Gregory Wells also entered a plea agreement, finally revealing the location where the missing executive's remains had been hidden. After nearly 30 years, another grieving family finally received answers they had stopped expecting. Daniel Brooks surrendered voluntarily after learning police no longer considered him the killer. He faced public humiliation, divorce proceedings, and civil consequences for his affair, but no criminal charges connected him to Victoria's death. Emily attended every court hearing. She listened to every confession, every lie, every painful truth. When the verdict was finally announced, applause never came. Justice felt strangely quiet. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded her with questions she ignored. Nothing they asked mattered anymore. She had entered her wedding believing love created unbreakable families. She left the courtroom understanding that trust could disappear long before anyone noticed the first crack. Her mother had hidden decades of blackmail. Her husband had hidden betrayal. Her father had unknowingly lived beside secrets for years. Even the perfect wedding photographs now felt like evidence collected from a crime scene instead of memories worth preserving. Detective Rachel Bennett watched Emily walk away from the courthouse alone. The case had ended. The paperwork would eventually be filed. The headlines would fade. But some investigations left wounds that no conviction could ever close. Emily finally understood that justice could punish the guilty without restoring what deception had stolen. The truth had won. Her life never would. Several months passed after Richard Bennett's conviction, yet time failed to erase the emotional scars left behind by the tragedy. Newspapers eventually stopped printing updates about the Harper case. Television crews moved on to newer headlines. Social media discussions faded into silence. To the outside world, the horrifying wedding murder had become another closed criminal investigation. For those whose lives had been shattered, however, the story never truly ended. Autumn slowly gave way to winter before returning once more to early spring. The countryside estate that had once echoed with music and celebration now stood unusually quiet. The owners had reopened the property for private events, but reservations remained scarce. Too many people associated the elegant ballroom with bloodshed rather than romance. Wedding planners quietly recommended other venues, unwilling to remind hopeful couples of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers and white roses. One cool afternoon, Emily Harper parked her car outside the estate. She had not returned since the investigation ended. For several minutes she remained seated behind the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the familiar stone building. The entrance looked exactly as it had on her wedding day, yet everything felt different. Fresh flowers decorated the front gardens, Windows reflected the afternoon sun, and birds drifted lazily across the open fields. Nature had moved forward without hesitation. People rarely did. Emily finally stepped from the car. She walked slowly along the same stone pathway where guests had applauded as she entered wearing her wedding dress. Every corner awakened another memory. She remembered laughing with childhood friends before the ceremony. She remembered embracing her mother in the bridal suite. She remembered dancing with Daniel beneath glowing lights before discovering the lies that had already poisoned the celebration. The ballroom doors stood open. Inside, workers quietly arranged tables for another wedding scheduled later that week. One young employee recognized Emily immediately. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I didn't know you were coming." Emily offered a small smile. "I just wanted to see it once." He nodded respectfully. "If you'd like privacy, I'll ask everyone to step outside." "Thank you." Within moments, the ballroom became silent. Emily stood alone in the enormous room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden floors that no longer carried any visible trace of the crime scene. Fresh white flowers occupied the same spaces where police markers had once surrounded her mother's body. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she could almost hear distant laughter from her wedding reception. Then another memory replaced it. Yellow police tape, flashing emergency lights, her own voice calling desperately for her mother. Emily opened her eyes again. Some memories refused to fade, no matter how much time passed. Before leaving, she walked toward the hallway where Victoria had taken her final steps. A small decorative painting now covered the section of wall once photographed endlessly by investigators. Nothing remained to suggest a murder had occurred there, except the memories carried by those who survived. Later that afternoon, Emily drove to the cemetery. Spring flowers surrounded Victoria Harper's grave, planted carefully by Thomas during the previous weeks. Fresh lilies rested beside the headstone, their fragrance drifting gently through the quiet air. Emily carried a single white rose. She knelt slowly. For several minutes she said nothing. Finally she spoke aloud. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times." The breeze stirred nearby trees. I kept asking why. Her voice trembled. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" Silence answered. "You spent 30 years protecting terrible secrets." Emily looked down at the engraved name. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped protecting the people who loved you." Tears formed quietly. "I was angry." She paused. "I still am." Another long silence followed. "But anger isn't the only thing I want to carry." Emily gently placed the white rose against the headstone. "I forgive you." She swallowed hard. Not because what happened was acceptable. Another tear rolled down her cheek. "I forgive you because I don't want your choices to become my future." She rested her hand lightly upon the cool stone. "I'll remember everything." A soft smile appeared despite the sadness. "But I won't spend the rest of my life